I'll start with just from a practical standpoint, and then Joe might be able to speak on this more because it's more political science. But the United States is fertile ground for a candidate who is unpopular, particularly among the leaders of the party, to ascend to the top of a ticket. We have a weak two-party model, and history has demonstrated that candidates have found their way to a slot as a finalist, and in other democracies, that's not the case. The party retains more control over who makes it into that pool of candidates, and so they're more hand-picked. And so I would argue, just from a practical matter, the strong feelings for both these candidates, people have these strong feelings. From a practical standpoint, the United States is probably as fertile a ground for this to happen as just about anywhere in the world.
So regarding the second investigation, with FBI Director Comey announcing that the FBI will reopen investigation into email after it's been discovered that there may be email messages involving Hillary Clinton on a laptop in Huma Abedin's house. How many? How many duplicates? About what? Anything incriminating? We don't know. We don't know anything, but we're going to reopen the investigation. Okay. Now, I'm not going to defend Hillary Clinton regarding the use of a private email server, and she's had a hard time defending herself on this front. But what I think this does highlight is a rather simple point. The truth is, our next president is either going to be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. There's no perfect candidate. Some years, this seems to be one of them, the candidates are far from perfect. Just keep this in mind. The lesser of two evils is the lesser of two evils. So my recommendation is to think hard about that and decide for yourself who that is, and make sure you vote.
So yeah, with your second question, I think you're pointing out one of the, I think, moral conflicts that we have to acknowledge with, like, classical immigration, undocumented immigration, right? There is a problem there, and to just say that, well, to sort of sweep away that overstay, that unrecognized illegal entry, you're right. I mean, right, that's the problem, and you shouldn't do that. So the things that I guess I would say are these. The first is that U.S. immigration is a particularly complex animal. We often talk about a line, as if there is, a single line that exists and you all take a number and then, you'll be let in. There's no line, right? It's a series of complex systems that determine whether or not you'll be allowed in. So there was really no line. As far as preferential treatment is concerned, I mean, you don't necessarily need to make anything preferential. I think the counterpoint to that would be looking at specific cases where people might not have been what we would determine to be guilty of breaking the law, or at least, of consenting age to break it. So if you look at the DREAM Act, and I'll be really quick about this, the DREAM Act was something that would provide a path to citizenship for people who entered the country before they were 16, right? And some examples of this, I mean, people can be very young when they come in. So you can look at somebody who's like, 12 or 13. And when you were 12 or 13, you didn't have a say where you lived. I mean, I know I didn't. I moved, when I was 13 years old, I moved from northern Idaho to southwestern Virginia. And if I had had a say, I wouldn't have stayed in northern Idaho, right? Scenic northern Idaho. So, to your point, I guess the best answer from the philosophy that we have on this is that in some cases, you know, you're right. You should take folks who, you know, aren't here legally, who violated some standard practice, and, you know, remove them. The other thing to keep in mind is this is not a zero-sum game. It's not necessarily the case, or it doesn't have to be the case, that, you know, you provide some sort of amnesty, be it blanket or otherwise, and then, well, we have 11.4 million people who are now here and are going to stay here. All of you people waiting, now we're going to, you know, take 11.4 million less. So you can sort of do both, I suppose, though, you know, I take your point that, you know, shouldn't be giving short shrift to people who are following the rules, so to speak.
Yeah, the solution, Derek, is a difficult one to arrive at. That I think that we need to do it in an incremental fashion. I think there were serious issues that have been given very short shrift, and I alluded to some of them during my presentation. And I think that we have to just be curious as a, you know, your generation needs to be curious and try to wrap our heads around serious issues. And it can happen in a lot of ways. It can happen in going to the polls and voting for people who talk about substantive issues, or at least a bit more about them. It can be in expressing yourself to your elected officials when they are holding office. It can be reaching out to different news outlets and letting them know. But it's, you know, I admit it, I watch the polls. I'm fascinated by the horse race as well. I mean, it's intriguing. And you have the you know, the red and blue graphics up there, and it's, we get caught up in it, and it is analogous to sports competitions. But I think it's at the expense of important things, and it is going to have to be really piecemeal, and it will take a long time for it to be something where we can see it changing, and it has to be done, I think, at the local level. And that's, we can talk all we want about the presidential election, but we're more impacted by the local officials that we elect than, we talked about trickle down, that term has come up. Yes, stuff at the federal level will trickle down, but we're going to be impacted more by Cecilia Hauser or Frank Burns in a House race here in Cambria County than we are Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton.
As with all things, The Simpsons tells us what to do. There's an episode that aired a long time ago where two aliens dress up as presidential candidates and come down, and both of them are going to enslave humanity and destroy the planet. And they are outed as aliens. And one is a Republican alien and one is a Democrat alien. And people, the voting population, say, well, we're not going to vote for you. And the aliens say, you have to vote for one of us. It's a two-party system. And they say, well, I'll vote for a third-party candidate. And one of them starts laughing and says, sure, just throw your vote away. And they're all murmuring in agreement. And poor Ross Perot punches a hole in his hat. And sure enough, one of the aliens wins the election. So honestly, this is something that you need to weigh for yourself. And I realize that might not be the answer that you want to hear. I could answer you like my grandma would answer you and say, stop being foolish. One of these two people is going to win. I don't agree with that. You know, you can operate according to the idea that I know one of these two folks is going to win, so I'm going to pick the lesser of two. Or you can go in with a clean conscience, I guess. But before you vote, and this is the only thing I'll say before I hand this to somebody else, make sure you read about these other candidates, because I've heard a lot of Bernie Sanders people coming out and supporting Gary Johnson, and that just blows my mind that somebody who supported Bernie Sanders could support Gary Johnson. I mean, unless, you know, legalization of drugs is the only thing you're concerned about. They couldn't be more different on so many issues. So yeah, if you want to, you know, vote with your conscience, go for it. But make sure you know who these people are.
Just one footnote to what Kyle says. Libertarianism is the antithesis of Bernie Sanders' populist approach. Libertarianism says, I have no responsibility for anybody else. I'll do my thing and you're on your own.
Students. Okay, so let's do this. A couple observations here. 5 days, we're going to make history. We'll either elect the first woman president in American history, or we'll elect the first president in American history who's not served in the government in any capacity. Both of those would be historical events, unprecedented in my lifetime, and certainly in most of the lifetime of our students. A lot of people here have encouraged you to vote tonight. I was not going to do that. I didn't think we were doing that, but I would say this. If you want to look at policies, which are really what this is all about in the end, I think we all hope that after the election, the kind of rancor and the attitudinal problems that everybody sees will fade a little bit, and then we'll be left with dealing with what the future of the country is. And so I would recommend if you go to either of the names, Donald Trump or HillaryClinton.com, you will find the policies that they actually are advocating. I think before I vote, I'd suggest and recommend that you try to do that. I'd like to thank all the members of the panel tonight who have participated and all of you coming in the audience. And thank you very much. Good evening.